It's going to be a good show tonight, and we'll have callers join us throughout. And join us now on live in the chat room. It's fun, and you can talk with the host, and you can join the discussion on air. I want to let everybody know that they can now find the Truth Finders for Justice Network online at carrylight.com. You can be a truth finder and join the network by suggesting and or working on stories with me for the blog and or the show. You can send articles, clips, comments, questions, story ideas, story requests, poems, anything. You can send that to truthfinders@carrylight.com. All right, y'all, let's get started tonight. Last Friday, Judge Perry upheld the order to have, sometime in the last week, it wasn't specifically even on that day. He hemmed around a lot. But he did uphold Casey Anthony's probation order. She has to do probation again. I've spoke to a lot of people about this issue. One of the best, most realistic conversations that I've had was with Holly Hughes, CNN contributor and attorney. She was so kind as to join me this week for a interview. It's neutral, it's honest, and I'm so proud to be able to offer this to you tonight. So for a true and legalistic view of the situation, please join me now for this in-depth interview with Holly Hughes. Okay, everybody, I'm so happy to announce that I have with me Holly Hughes. She is a CNN contributor and a prosecuting attorney, and I was fortunate enough to meet her when I flew to New York City. We were both guests on the Father Albert show, and I just think she's awesome. I respect her, and I'm feeling really grateful that she's agreed to have a conversation today about what's been going on with Casey Anthony and her probation and all that kind of thing. And I know that you've already had all kinds of thoughts about it, so I'll let you just kind of go, Holly, and tell me what your thoughts are for right now.
Okay, well, I think the biggest question we should all be asking ourselves, Carrie, is if this was any other defendant in the world, would we see this much brouhaha over the question of has probation been served? Now, I will say from a legal standpoint, the whole system of probation is set up to help people reintegrate into society.
Right.
Probation is there to kind of help you not commit another crime, and when you're tempted, you can call your probation officer and check in, and they're there to help you find employment, and they also offer, job skills programs, and if you have a problem with thievery, some people, some of the probation departments offer classes on kleptomania, so you can get a lot of help there, and that's the purpose of probation. Now, what happened with Casey was incarcerated for other charges. While she pled guilty to her check fraud charges, she wasn't allowed then to just sort of walk out on the street and start serving her probation because she was being held on other felony charges.
Right.
So what happened was the probation department, figuring, hey, the sentence happened on this day, we're going to go down and sign her up for probation. And they did that. They visited her in the jail. They gave her paperwork. They took her info. They signed her up. They told her who her officer was going to be. They assigned somebody to her. And a year later, they sent her a paper saying, hey, congratulations, you're done your probation. What happened was, when Casey was released because she was acquitted on the most serious charges, and she had served enough time for the counts that she was convicted of, which was the lying counts, and she had served all the time she could possibly serve on those. So she was released because that's how the law operates. There's only so many days that you can be held for certain crimes. Because she had completed the sentence, and off she went.
As with anybody.
Exactly. That's exactly right. The same laws apply to every single defendant. Well, what we see then is Judge Strickland, who everybody will remember was the very first judge in the murder case. He was originally assigned, and he was on, I think, a blog page and made some comments about the death penalty, which gave the defense team concerns. And they said, hey, you're prejudging. You've got to think about the death penalty. We want you recused. And so Judge Strickland took himself off of that case, but he did stay on the check fraud case, and he accepted her guilty pleas. And so he had said in court, in open court, he said, when you're released, upon your release, then you'll serve a year of supervised probation. And, you know, let's be honest, everybody. Judge Strickland never thought she was getting released, okay?
I think so, too. And I know that we're just speculating, but at the same time, you know, looking at behavioral sciences, it's clear that that's what it was all about.
Exactly. And so, you know, it seems, I mean, if we're going to call it like it is, you know, and I just tell it like I see it, whether you agree with me or not. And it seems to me that nobody really expected her to ever get released, or at least not for 40, 50 years, until she served some serious time on the murder case. Well, then, you know, the jury comes back and the jury says, hey, you know, we're going to acquit her on the more serious. And all of a sudden, what nobody expected is that Casey Anthony is back on the street. And so it seems to me, I mean, technically speaking, from a purely legalistic standpoint, Judge Perry is correct in his ruling. No appeals court is going to overturn that, because an appeals court will not mess with a judge's ruling unless there is a very clear error in the law that was applied. And
now,
so
why do you think Judge Perry's ruling, the one just on Friday where he said she definitely has to do probation, you're saying that you feel that's correct?
It is legally correct. Harry.
Okay.
Yeah, legally, under the law, yes, he did find enough case law to support his position, and his position, that is what the judge says from the bench, an oral order from the bench. So when Judge Strickland said, upon your release you must serve supervised probation, obviously that was his intent. And, you know, we go a lot in the law, we talk a lot about legislative intent. What did the legislature really make this law for? You know, it's a public policy argument. And so what we see is we see Judge Perry standing on judicial intent. And he said clearly, based on the words, Judge Strickland intended for her to serve probation outside of jail, outside of prison.
Since he didn't really have any, you know, per se, precedence for this particular thing, and because it was such a mess, he really had to find some default purpose of why he would rule, and that way that makes sense.
Exactly, that's exactly right. And if you watch the hearings, you know, I was actually on HLN commenting while we were watching the hearings live, and I think that Judge Perry expected the prosecution to come to the table with the answers for him. I think he expected Frank George to stand up and pitch a fit and say, we object, and she needs to come back and serve it, and here's the law.
And they didn't. They were very disconnected, it seemed like.
Exactly. But that's actually normal, Carrie, and what most listeners probably don't realize is once a case is pled out and the prosecutor has had her say on the record, the supervising agency then becomes the probation department, and quite frankly, prosecutors will not usually interfere in that process, because now this is between the agency, the probation agency.
It's a different jurisdiction.
And the defense. Now, of course, you know, if this is, you know, somebody who's armed robbed 18 old ladies, and there's then the state might say, hey, I have something to say here, Judge. You know, we want this continued, or we want this to be a violation of probation. But typically, prosecutors don't have a dog in the fight when it comes to probation matters. And so I think what happened was, I think Judge Perry was a little bit shocked that the state did not come in there guns blazing, saying, put her on probation, force her back here. They just said, hey, you know, it is what it is, and, you know, you could bring her back, you might not, you know. And you'll notice that Judge Perry jumped in, and he started questioning the lady on the phone, the probation officer, who was the sole witness for the defense. And then when that didn't really get him what he needed, then he started questioning the female attorney, and her name escapes me right now.
Elizabeth Fry.
Yes, and she was fantastic, and she had great case law, and she was well-spoken, and she gave a great presentation.
She interacted well with Judge Perry.
Exactly, and Judge Perry just, you know, he showed her a lot of respect because she came prepared. You know, unfortunately, what we saw between Baez and the judge was, you know, Judge Perry didn't think that Baez was always prepared, so you saw a lot of bickering and a lot of, you know, obvious
dislike. He took the position that Jose Baez knew about this glitch and just allowed it to occur.
Yes, he did. He wrote a 13-page opinion, and 2 pages of it were excoriating Baez. You know, and it brings to mind some of the scenes we saw throughout the trial where he said things on the record like, you know, Mr. Baez, I think this is willful. I think your discovery violation is intentional. I'm going to hold a contempt hearing when this is all said and done.
Well,
so
can I
I
ask
think
you
it was strategically. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, on that issue, I know exactly what you're talking about because I saw that trial, but I saw it on both sides.